creative, the emergence of AI-powered tools has been a game changer for many reasons. Each day, I find more and more the platforms I use are integrating AI tools that will write blog posts, create keywords, and create images for me. AI is definitely driving the creative boat these days. So, who owns the rights to this content? Can I, as a creative, use AI comfortably to create content for my clients without worrying about authorship or attribution? And it's something I always think about. As AI tools become more sophisticated, creatives like me will need to understand how copyright laws address ownership rights for content generated by the AI algorithms, especially in cases where human input is minimal or completely absent. And just so everyone knows, this will be an ongoing topic for BrandKramp, so check back often for updates. Today, I'd like to welcome back attorney Matthew Patterson, president of Optimal IP Strategies. He's my resident expert on all things related to IP, to discuss the emerging legal considerations and debates regarding the ownership of AI-generated content. That's a nice mouthful. Welcome, Matt, and happy Friday.
Thanks, Aileen. Thanks for having me back. Yep, it is Friday finally. Thanks.
Woohoo! And it's raining.
Again.
Yeah, okay.
Here in the Northeast.
Exactly. But at least it's warm, which is good. All right. Here's our first topic or question. As AI-generated content becomes more prevalent, what challenges come up in determining authorship and attribution, particularly, as it relates to things like ChatGPT, Canva, Adobe, the tools that creatives use to develop their content?
Sure. I mean, that's a question on everybody's mind, right? So what we're really talking about in the law is copyright law, right? And it's in the United States. It's governed by U.S. Copyright Office and legislation and courts. Okay, and so to begin with, copyrights vest in the creator once they're reduced to a tangible medium. So if you sing original lyrics and it's not recorded, it's not copyrighted. But as soon as somebody records it, boom, it vests. The rights vest in the author or the singer or whoever wrote the lyrics. So in AI generated, purely generative AI like ChatGPT, if you take a prompt, run it through ChatGPT, and it outputs something, right? It outputs some written material. That absolutely nobody owns that output, okay? And the cases are actually pretty, they're being generated very quickly in the courts of the United States. The one that everybody is relying on is the monkey selfie case. I don't know if you remember that or if the listeners remember that. But it was where a guy dropped his camera, his iPhone, into a monkey cage. Monkey took a bunch of selfies, right? And the guy tried to register he got his camera back, and he tried to register the owner of the camera, tried to register his those pictures as him being the author, but he wasn't. He didn't take the pictures, okay? And then some people on behalf of the monkey tried to register the pictures, and they couldn't register them either because only humans can own the copyright, okay? So nobody owned them, right? They're in the public domain, right? So, and like I said, if it's purely AI generated, nobody owns it, right? But it's still, this is still an evolving thing. So, and it's part of your question. So the latest guidance from the Copyright Office is, and I'll quote here, a work containing AI generated material will also contain sufficient human authorship to support a copyright claim. Where, for example, an author had made creative arrangement of AI works or substantially modified AI generated works.
Oh, okay.
And so what that means is that the output from DALL-E or from ChatGPT in and of itself can't be copyrighted. But the case here was where a woman used DALL-E to generate a whole bunch of cartoons. And she tried to register the cartoons themselves individually. And they were not registerable because they were just straight output from DALL-E, even though she gave him the prompts, right? They were just straightforward prompts. Um, but but she also tried to register the book, the comic book that um, contained those materials, and the book was deemed to be registerable because there was enough creativity in the way she arranged the book to rise to the level of copyright.
So how would she have known that the cartoons themselves were not copyrightable? Had she worked with an attorney, or did she try and submit them and they were declined? Like what happened? How would she have known?
So you won't know ahead of time unless you actually try to register enough ahead of time, right? Because it does take, you know, up to 4 months or so to hear back from the Copyright Office. But and like we've been talking about, the laws evolving. So if it was, now we know that just straight out of a generative AI tool, it's the content is not copyrightable, right?
Okay.
So, and it's a case of first impression, right? And it really does draw a bright line between what's copyrightable and what's not from AI generated stuff in
Yeah.
in that particular case.
So, as AI tools continue to advance, let's talk about sort of the emerging legal considerations and debates regarding the ownership of AI generated content, because that sort of takes it to the next step. She created cartoons that could not be copyrighted, but when she put them in a book, because there was enough content of her own, it was copyrightable. So let's talk about that.
Sure. So, in order for something to be copyrightable, it has to contain sufficient um, uh, artistic expression, right? So, like the phone book can't be copyrighted; it's just a list of facts, right? Um, but if you were to take that phone book and for every name, made some expression, that could be copyrightable, right? Um, but when you take an when you if somebody produces a copyrighted expression, a drawing or something, and somebody else tweaks it, okay, it's called a derivative work, right? And so you can't take somebody else's work and make de minimis changes to it, right? Um, but when you take a work that's AI generated, and then you put enough of your expression in it, right? Then you can own the copyright, so long as what you put into it rises to the level of copyright standards. So if you take a Chat GPT, you put in a nice prompt, it gives you written material, and then you heavily edit that material and put in your own expression. Now you own the copyright to that edited material, right?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that the technology is changing quickly and the law moves slowly.
Right.
And I really like that concept.
Right.
And it's going to require new approaches to the emerging legal issues. And, one of the things that you mentioned was, um, you know, you have to strike a balance between the existing rights and innovation, including the AI developers, the owners and users, and those who own copyright in the content needed to train the tools.
Right.
So let's talk about that. Like that to me is fascinating. As a
Right.
user of platforms that use I never think about the training that goes on behind the scenes. Like Chat GPT, when the folks who developed that when they created it, they created something that is tangible. And I never think about sort of the back end. So let's talk about, copyright and the content needed to train the tools. That's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. The way that AI works is it needs a massive amount of data. Okay. And so the data that Chat GPT uses are words, right? And patterns within those words, and um, patterns within the patterns. Okay. So you take what Chat GPT did in just in basic form was it took a whole bunch of content that this one organization um, fed into a database, right? So it took all this copyrighted material, fed it into a database, and ChatGPT trained models on how words generally go together, okay? And
Wow.
then how expressions using those words generally go together. So when you, and then it uses that model to keep training as new material comes up, as people prompt it, so you put in a prompt, tell me a story about a single red rose in a vase, right? And it will put together a story for you, right? And it's based on the database that it was trained on, right?
Hmm.
So red rose and vase comes together, and might add water because that, that's how it uses the trained model to act on your prompt to give you something that makes sense. Right?
So what I find interesting, and I use Chat GPT quite a bit to help me think creatively. Like I throw topics at it and it makes me go, huh, sometimes. But I
Right.
find that I always have to tell it to write like an American.
Yeah, the prompts mean everything, right?
Yeah. So
Right.
does it mean that the training is happening in Europe and not in our country? Like could you draw that conclusion?
So, right. I mean, it's mining material from everywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you just brought up an important topic. Like, so it gets trained on what existed before,
Right.
right? So it really doesn't advance the state of the art at all, right? So, tell me what's going to happen 10 years from it, it won't be accurate at all, right?
Yeah.
And so that's another thing you have to watch out for as you're putting your prompt together, right? So, acting as a graphic designer, give me 5 different taglines for a liquor store that specializes in high-end whiskeys, right? And so it will give you these 5 things that it pulls from, um, what it knows, and what it knows is what it was trained on, right?
Right.
So, those are the kind of prompts you need to
Yeah.
do to get the right output, right? And then
Mhm.
you would heavily edit those things,
Yes.
right?
It was funny because today or this morning, one of my clients wanted to write sort of a promo for a luncheon she's hosting in the theme of Old MacDonald Had a Farm.
Right,
And it was
right.
hysterical because it couldn't get the cadence down, but it
Oh,
got the EIEIO. And I
oh,
asked it, I said, do it like an American, which is probably the politically incorrect way to say it, but it incorporated like y'all and
right,
woohoo and like cowboy analogies,
right, right, right.
which
Yeah, it
is
reminds me. I fed a prompt in the recent history of the United States Congress. I fed a prompt and said, "Give me a satirical story about Speaker McCarthy in the theme of if you give a mouse a cookie." And they titled it "If You Give a Speaker a Gavel," right?
oh my
And
God,
then
that's awesome.
it just unraveled from there. It was pretty interesting, very
Yeah,
very very
that's
creative,
cool.
right?
That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. So how do intellectual property laws account for the evolving nature of the AI algorithms and their potential to generate new content? And like what measures are in place to prevent infringement? And I guess, what I think about with that topic, most of the work that I do is for hire. So I work for clients, they own the rights to whatever I produce. But because I produce it, in the back of my mind, if I use Chat GPT to write copy, or if I use something, an AI tool to create something for my clients, it's always in the back of my mind like, oh man, I don't want to put them in a position of facing infringement.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, um, especially in the written word, right? They being ChatGPT used a copy of a book that was copyrighted. Okay, and so the book has 80,000 words, right? And so 80,000 words of that book get mixed with everybody else's words, right? And then you give ChatGPT a prompt, and it spits out 60 words. So it may have, you know, 3 or 4 of those 80,000 words in there. And it's a de minimis use. It's what's called a de minimis use of that original work. So you haven't infringed that work because it's de minimis, right? The person who infringed it would be ChatGPT because they consumed the whole thing, right?
Oh,
So they may be the infringer. And I say maybe because, right now the laws are just trying to catch up, as we
yeah.
talked about. And there's 10 class action suits going on right now against the company that downloaded all of these works and then gave them or sold them to ChatGPT. So
Really?
those two entities are being sued, and there's 10 different lawsuits out there doing it, right?
So who is the one who identified that a lawsuit needed to be placed? I mean, how did that happen?
So it's different organizations that represent writers, say,
Oh, okay.
right?
Gotcha. That
So
makes
writers are complaining, hey, what are you going to do about my stuff, right? And so that's how the lawsuits get started.
And how would they know? I mean, that's a whole Big Brother kind of thing. Like, how would they know that their content was being used?
Because there was this one organization, 3K, that was found to have downloaded all of this or digitized all of this content,
Ah,
right? So they took copyrighted material, digitized it, and then used it to sell it to AI generators.
wow. So that's a big business. So I would imagine that, folks like ChatGPT have IP attorneys working with them
Oh
constantly.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. They're really helping the industry for my
Wow.
industry, right?
Yeah.
But as you register your so say you want to register your copyrighted material now, right? And you use ChatGPT to do it, right? And so you consulted me. I tell you, okay, you really need to you know heavily edit. If you take your ChatGPT generated stuff right to the trademark office, you fill out. It's not really a form, but it's step by step. You step through it online, and they're going to ask you a question about the original authorship, right? And in some cases they're going to, depending on the product, they're going to ask you whether it was AI generated or not, right? And you have to be truthful about answering those questions, right? So if you spent an hour editing 3 pages of ChatGPT generated stuff, you're probably going to be okay uh, from an authorship standpoint, right? Because you put in enough creative content.
Well, it's funny because I know that there's a trend that's starting now in marketing with creatives where they're tagging things, 100% human created. There's also though people out there who are telling creatives, I have some AI technology that will give you a human written um, value of 10. So like they're creating AI that surpasses anything that can detect AI written content. And I think about that
Right.
and sort of what's coming up and how it's used in like the deep fake kind of thing, how images are being created with the election in our country coming up in November, how AI is being used on the deceptive side.
Right.
And I mean, and Taylor Swift had a big deal when they had nudie pictures of her circulating. Then it wasn't her, but it was created to look like her, and they circulated on porn sites. Like, what rights do you have over that? Like, how? Let's talk about that because that's crazy.
It is, and so I mean that's it's a little bit of a different topic in that there's rules that protect um, uh, social media providers, right? Where they're just posting the content, they're not
Okay.
liable for the content, right? So, you'd have to go back to uh, whomever posted that, right? And if you could find that person who posted, the pictures of Taylor Swift, if you will, right? Um, there's, you know, there's people who are trying to get that changed, but the point is, and you brought this up earlier, freedom of speech, right? Or I think that's the way that, or freedom of expression, but freedom of speech, right, is only as it respects the government, right? So you only have a claim that your rights have been violated, constitutional rights, freedom of speech, if it's the government that's trying to stop you from saying things. Okay.
Really?
So yes.
Huh.
So if it's a private entity, I know people talk about this all the time. Oh my God, I got taken down off of Facebook, right? My freedom of speech.
Well,
No,
my
you have
husband,
no freedom. Case in point. But you have no right to freedom of speech when it relates to private entities like Facebook or Twitter. You're subject to their policies, right? And so long as their policies haven't been reckless, right, they've been upheld, right?
In one of our conversations, you mentioned, and I'm sort of going to read your words, that AI generated works that borrow heavily from the original works may be considered derivative of the original author, and the publisher of the derivative work might be liable for infringement.
Right. So you take, I I give you or I give you rights to one of my photographs,
Yep.
right?
Of an eagle,
And
just so you
of an
know.
eagle, right? And I say, all rights reserved, right? You can have this one copy. You digitize it and feed it into DALL-E, right? Now you've just infringed my original, right? DALL-E hasn't, you have, right? Because you just made a derivative work of mine. If I were to feed my work, that same picture, into DALL-E, what comes out the other end is public domain, and you can use it, right? Because it was my right to do that, not yours, right?
Huh.
I've just traced it back to the person who infringed my copyright, just as that company that uploaded the book, right, and digitized it. They had no right to do that, and you had no right to make a
Wow.
derivative copy of mine.
So in light of all the AI stuff as it relates to creatives, like what is going on in the world of copyright and trademarking and stuff? Is there a ton of chatter? Like, are IP attorneys, like what is going on in your world? Because I mean, you have to keep up with the technology, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
and what's going on, and there's plenty of people out there who know what they're doing and do it anyway, but
Right.
people like me who don't know what the hell they're doing, and don't know how to protect it. And like every time I turn around, the platforms that I use to do my job every day are integrating AI technology, and
Right.
sometimes I don't know that I'm using it.
Right. And so, I mean, you brought up trademark, which is a totally different topic.
Yes,
So
I always do that.
just
I'm sorry.
just sticking with that's fine. Just sticking with copyright and AI generative tools, right? Um, and so, not even talking about the other areas of the law, which use AI to generate things, but just from an IP standpoint, just from a copyright standpoint, um, like like I said, you need to keep track of what it is you're doing, right? So, what are your prompts? What are keeping notes on, where the content came from? Here's what my client said, right? So, and here's how I expressed that in a prompt. Here's what came out, right? So you kept that file, and here was the final edited version, right? So it's a way for you to keep track of it all, right? But you using a tool, it's highly, highly unlikely that you would infringe the original copyright owner.
Okay. Because even the I on podcast page, which hosts the BrandKramp website, you can write a blog, but it prompts you, do you want AI to write your blog post? Which is insane. And for some people that's like, absolutely, write it, let's go. Whereas for me,
But here's the thing: if you prompt the if you prompt Chat GPT to write your blog post,
yes,
what comes out the other end is not owned by anybody, right?
right,
So it's fine. You can't claim rights to it though. That's the that's
right,
the other part, right? So something for a blog post, that's probably okay,
right.
right? But for work that you're giving to your client to use in their advertising, you probably want to be able to they probably want to be able to claim ownership over that.
Yes,
Right?
true. And it's interesting because I haven't seen um, anything from the client side as a creative. And I'm sure on a very higher level, like, agencies in New York and stuff, probably have to sign some sort of an agreement regarding AI and
Right.
how, they got to disclose usage and stuff like that.
Right. They have to disclose the use of AI.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And they have to take steps to avoid um, AI, so
Right.
that the rights are owned by the person paying for the work.
Yep. Yep. And it's funny, just to totally tangent off of this. I know, on the school level too, my daughter is a senior in high school, and they're doing a lot of writing in a lot of the classes, and the teachers really shut down the whole AI thing. And there are ways in the school system that they can tell if you've written it yourself or used AI, which is interesting. So there'll probably be more of that in our future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the AI is going to get better at fooling the systems that try to catch it too. Right.
Yeah,
So.
exactly. So as we sort of come to an end of this episode, which is fascinating, by the way, so thank you very much. We're going to end with 3 tips for creators. And this is something that you and I have touched on a little bit in this, but really the first thing you can do if you use platforms as a creative like me, review the terms of service before you use any of the AI tools, and look at the user agreements to understand the platform's policies regarding the ownership rights, and be sure to look for clauses that specify ownership, licensing, and usage rights. Right.
Right. Right. And if you don't understand, the language, right, seek out help. Right. I mean, there are forums, right, and fallback is an attorney.
Yeah, sure. And I would imagine if, you're, an agency or someone that creates a ton of content, that it is your best interest to have a relationship with an IP attorney, just to
Right.
review stuff. Guys, I mean, I certainly ask you enough questions about stuff. The second tip, as you mentioned, is to keep detailed records. Maintain documentation of your creative process, including any of your prompts, modifications or customizations that you've made to the AI generated content. Um, and, I can say that I do that when I use it, but as you mentioned earlier, what I do is I have pretty detailed prompts. I will say I have a client in Glastonbury, Connecticut who sells widgets, and their business is focused on X, Y, and Z, and I'm doing a marketing program for them where I'm going to be promoting them online in March. And I just put in like
Right.
as much detail as possible.
Right.
And then when I get the content, I absolutely edit it for their voice. But
Yeah. But when you do detailed prompts, what ends up happening is that ChatGPT, for an example, will output a lot of your own words.
Yes.
Right. So 90% of the content is yours to begin with. Right.
Correct.
When you give detailed prompts.
And then, the third tip is, customize and add value. And that's really what we're talking about, whenever possible, customize your AI generated content by adding your unique creative elements and your voice, and those types of things. To your point, it makes it more yours than theirs. So, yeah. So, any other parting words?
No, I think you just got to get comfortable with using AI generated material, and because it's going to be more and more critical to do that, right? Just to come up with different material, and to be able to compete, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. Good topic.
All right.
Good topic, and nobody interrupted us.
Exactly. Exactly.